Some argue that Britain is broken. Certainly the institutions that I can see are creaking.
When we think about the issue of immigration, uncontrolled immigration, what are the issues? What are the problems in relation to all of that that you think most people can actually agree on across the various divides?
That immigration has been a good thing for our country. Post-Second World War, the very fact that you and I are sitting here is a result of the need of the day back in 40s, 50s, 60s, the rebuilding of Britain. Migration has fueled the economy, has rebuilt the economy, industrial cities and towns across our country. Without migration, in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, the country is going to, the United Kingdom is really going to have a labour shortage. It already has a labour shortage. Social change and theory of change, and I often have been in many conversations. I do strategy and we do all these for civil society organisations. But the real beautiful part is when we get on the ground, when we see the social change take place. And I think that's where the magic happens. And if we keep the magic going in both spaces, then inshallah we can have a positive outlook for a better view of the world and a better view of our society and a better view of making Britain great again.
Jehangir Malik, welcome to In Good Faith.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Well, we have a history. We have a history.
We have a history indeed.
It's good to sit down with you and maybe reflect on parts of that, but more importantly, what you're up to nowadays, which all sounds very interesting. In fact, you've just come off the back of a meeting of various civil society leaders discussing, I understand, the appropriate responses to the populism that we see nowadays. So what happened at this meeting? What can you share with us?
I've kind of, in my role as the Interim Director for Together with Refugees, it's a refugee coalition of 600 organisations that are frontline organisations that serve the most marginalised, destitute in our society, refugees, asylum seekers, those on the cold face, on the receiving end of hate at this moment in time, whether they're housed in hotels, accommodation, all the rest of it. Unfortunately, the narrative has turned against those that are seeking asylum in our country. And that's the organisation that I'm working for and with at this moment in time. The last few months, especially over the summer, have been extremely challenging because the vitriol, the hate, the rhetoric, the divisive, turning up the hate has been towards refugees and migrants, as if they're the scourge of our society. And we saw that play out last year in the horrific Southport riots and attacks, which I felt was a trigger warning from, I started reflecting and thinking about this well before I came into the role, but from last year. And then more recently, as I come into the role, we're in sector conversations around the civil society sector and their sort of how they're feeling, what their response is, how to coordinate, and what a counter strategy looks like in rising populism. Because we all know, I think one thing everybody has said across the room, the face of it is rising hatred towards refugee and migrants because it's an easy target, as if they're the cause of all our woes in our society. And then if you look at the sort of couple of weeks ago, Tommy Robinson's demo, Unite the Kingdom, it was all against Islam and Muslims and hatred, and all the speakers, a lot of the speakers that came on that demo and platform spoke anti-Muslim, anti-Islam. Islam has no space and place in our society, has no place in multicultural, and so that's the kind of rhetoric. So you can see where it starts out and where it sort of moves. And slightly sort of more recent, sort of slightly further back, in July this year, I visited Bosnia, 30th year of Srebrenica. Took my mind back to 1995, where I read this book called Hearts Grown Brutal, a New York Times journalist. And it was covered at that time, and I was living in the United States. Hearts can grow brutal, and the end, sort of the brutality dial was clearly demonstrated in Bosnia during that time. What a beautiful place. Have you been?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
What a beautiful, amazing, cross-cultural, cross-faith, cross-society, what former Yugoslavia and then what Bosnia looked like. 30 years on, hearts growing brutal, have neighbours turn upon neighbours. What I remember back then, when I was in my mid-20s, how neighbours turned upon each other, how politicians who turned up to ethno-nationalistic hatred, Serbian at the time, turned towards the Bosnian Muslims, we'd heard back then about marriage, intermarriage, interconnectedness, coexistence, basically living, together, what you might call integrated lives. And what happened to the Bosnians in that sort of thing. So insan, I guess, has this ability, about the ability to turn up the hatred, but at the same time, we have the ability to turn up the love. And today, this meeting was about turning up the love and turning up how we as civil society respond to the rising hatred. The positive thing was I saw a cross-sector of civil society across the board, climate change organizations, refugee migrant organizations, humanitarian development, homeless charities, alliances and allyship right across the board, Friends of the Earth, about 40 to 50 sector leaders in that room, all sort of concerned about what's coming. Because if you read the polls and if you've seen everything that is being stated, this is a seismic shift. This is a seismic political shift. And civil society, in quotes, is trying to prepare itself, gear itself up to put a counter-narrative to that hatred where communities live cohesively together. No doubt there's challenges and problems, but we live in a way that strengthens our bonds in our communities, in our cities, in our towns, in our country, to counteract the hatred that's being fueled. Because the vast majority of the polling says that people don't hate minorities, people don't hate Muslims, people don't hate refugee migrants. Of course, we want a better system that deals with it. We don't want them in hotels, or we don't want people like this. We don't want people living in poor socioeconomic backgrounds, conditions, and we want good housing, good education, good all the rest of it. But this fuel on the fire is being turned up at this moment in time.
That's a good introduction, useful introduction. There's a lot of different components, so maybe the rest of this conversation is going to be breaking down, aspects of what you've shared. Firstly, I think it would be useful just to understand whether you want to give your own sort of view on this, or just reflect, I suppose, the view of the various types of leaders who are present at this particular gathering. When we think about the issue of immigration, uncontrolled immigration, the asylum-seeking system, the refugee situation in the country, what are the issues? What are the problems in relation to all of that you think most people can actually agree on across the various divides?
That immigration has been a good thing for our country. Post-Second World War, the very fact that you and I are sitting here is a result of the need of the day back in 40s, 50s, 60s, the rebuilding of Britain, the railways, the infrastructure, the textiles, the industrial cities and towns across our country. Migration has fueled the economy, has rebuilt the economy, has rebuilt all of that. Now, there have been a number of challenges, and so on the whole, immigration, movement of people has always been there throughout time. I think the particular focus is on racialized. And just to illustrate a positive point, Ukraine war happened, and Homes for Ukraine was a program. It was extremely well received. People flew the flag of Ukraine, supported, and we were involved in the programs. I mean, prior to this role, we were involved in community initiatives that housed people fleeing a war and persecution. The challenge of it is the fact that the same doesn't apply across. There have been positive programs of persecution, refugee, safe passageways, as it were, legal routes, as it's called, or routes and those have been closed over time. So which then leads itself to people making the perilous journey, because the routes now have been sort of closed in which that were open before. So there was an Afghan program, there was a Syrian program. There were a number of programs which were safe and legal routes. Safe and routes, again, remember, we're signatories to the International Geneva Convention, we're signatories to all these international rules and agreements. As a country, we've actually contributed to writing all those rules and laws, as it were. So as a whole, our country has greatly benefited from migration. We sit here as children of immigrants who not only did they pay their dues, they worked damn hard, especially the first generation of the 60s and the 70s, my parents' generation. They worked all the hours God gave and worked night shift, day shifts, and all the rest of it. So the rebuilding of Britain happened as a result of the incoming immigrants throughout time, and have contributed toward helping create a better society. There is a challenge, underpinning challenge, which is social and economic decline, which has been happening in our towns and cities across. In the decline of industry has led to a decline of infrastructure, work, economy, and the likes, and so forth. That is a challenge for all. This is not a challenge which is limited to refugees and migrants, but it's framed in such a way that makes it shine a spotlight on the refugee migrant sector. But like I said, it's not limited to, because it will be minorities, Muslims, brown people, and people of all different walks of life. Just last week, it was mentioned in the that one of the shadow ministers was walking through Birmingham, in a place where my wife grew up, in Handsworth, saying that it's not integrated because I didn't see white people. It's integrated, you just didn't see white people, okay? That doesn't make it not integrated. That's a loaded term designed to, again, fuel this narrative. And then the next 48, 72 hours, we're talking about what is integration, what isn't integration. The issue in Handsworth, which I've seen up close and personal, is very, very neglected part of Birmingham, in which that waves of migrant communities come and settle, work really hard, put their kids through education. They put their in very, very difficult. So it has waves of communities that settle there, from the Irish communities to the black communities to the African Caribbean music communities. I mean, the 80s, it would be before your time, but there's famous groups like Aswad and Musical Youth, and all of that came through Handsworth. All these, I'm sure you've heard of Benjamin Zephaniah. These are all from Handsworth. These are all cultural outputs of a town, of an area called Handsworth. But it's easy to just say, hey, I've come into an area, I don't see any white people, so it's not integrated. It's a problem of migration. It's very, very lazy, easy, fundamentally othering. We talk about London. Oh, London's on fire. Oh, London's in a poor state. It's run by a Muslim mayor. It's so easy to other in this way. So if the nation is like that, it gives you an indication that the country is like that. So this fueling of this divisive narrative, I think, will pit communities against another, and I don't think it's going to solve our problems of our society. And I think we want to get to a place in which that we're contributing, where we're thinking about solutions to social ills in our society, and I'm expecting that we'll cover this. But the purpose, I remember coming back to our strategy days in the likes of Islamic Relief, and I'm sure we're going to cover, but one of the first strategies that I was involved in was called Faith in Action. The action part is really the outward manifestation of what's internally. Internally, they're driven by my faith, but action has to speak louder, and that's where what the manifestation of our view of tackling the social. So personally, our view of tackling the social ills and the divisive rhetoric isn't a counter-protest. I don't think a counter-protest is the right thing. You stand on one side of the road, I stand on the other side of the road, and let's just go at it. Really, I don't think that's going to really solve this situation. And I don't think that feels like the right place in which that will start conversations.
No, sure. So what I wanted to ask about next was, the extent to which, again, just taking back even just to the meeting that you just had, the extent to which because you spoke of a counter narrative being developed, fine, but similar to the kind of protest example that you gave, it's possible for you have more what we say less loosely describe as the populist types, who are on this end who are talking to the people.
Yeah.
You have the counter narrative, civil society leaders, etc., talking to the people. But the question I want to ask is what the scope is, and did anything come out of this meeting to actually support the possibility of actually leadership talking to each other in a constructive fashion. And in relation to that, because
you mean leadership on both sides?
Yes, and because everybody can say, oh, those are the people who are bigoted and they're full of hate and everything else.
And then,
yeah, exactly. So you're on receipt of that, and then you're kind of just doing the same thing, but you're not really talking, and then you just. But what? What I want to do. I think the part of my previous question, which I didn't maybe hear enough of, but maybe you can just kind of in relation to this. Then what I asked was, what can we agree is a problem, not what. Yes, everything you said about the positive case for integration, everybody's heard, since whenever, right? And maybe it needs to be said more, not taking anything away from that. But it would also seem to me, and then in relation to this, if you're going to actually have a constructive conversation with the other side with regards to these topics and issues, I'm just interested to know whether there is, even beneath the bigoted language and sometimes hateful sort of speech and everything else, are there any sound points there, essentially?
In order to have a rational policy framing conversation, you've got to take the political heat out the conversation, okay? And at the moment, it's fully, there's a fire under this topic. So it's framed in such a way that you're either on this side or you're on that side. Is there a middle ground? Absolutely there is. Is there ways in which that we should say what kind of country we want to be? Yes. What kind of society we want to hold? We want to protect our fundamental human rights framework, our internationalist approach, and our contribution towards ensuring that we have safe and stable countries in which people are fleeing from in the first place. And reflecting on, I've traveled a lot. I've traveled to about 35, 42 of these countries in my previous roles as a humanitarian. And I can really, given the choice, people would stay. People would very much stay. They're fleeing persecution or economic migrants. And so one of the kind of strategies around this is to better invest in ensuring that stable, less instability, more stability, more civil society, more business, more economic prosperity to enable countries to stay. Sadly, government policy has been as such that we've moved away, reduced the international development budget and move that towards defence. I think that's a mistake. I think we can demonstrate and prove how helping support stabilizing countries after war, after conflict is a good thing, and it helps keep migration down. Secondly, there needs to be policy level conversations as what's a good number. I don't want to get into what's a good number, but what's a good framing in which that enables us to say we need this many number of people. We've got an aging population. You will need without migration in 20 years time or 30 years time, the country is going to, the United Kingdom is really going to have a labour shortage. It already has a labour shortage because of birth rates, aging populations, and all the demographics that point to that. So this is needed. Now the question is, what type? How do you want it? How do you integrate it? How do you ensure that a good refugee integration system enables people not to be jailed up in, holed up and jailed in hotels, not being able to contribute to wider society? Those are bad policies that need to be re-examined and reviewed so that we can make the process. I spent 2 years on the Commission for the Integration of Refugees. We travelled to about 14 rural, urban, and city consultations. I was sitting in a consultation in Hereford, in a church setting, and there's very few, and it was with Syrian communities, and there's very, very few. I don't think there's much of a Muslim community as such in Hereford. And I spoke to the Syrians that were there at the time. The church provided Friday prayers, Jummah, Eid, Ramadan, food, halal, all of that set up. It was a phenomenal faith-inspired service to the wayfarer, to the traveller, to those who are being persecuted or welcomed. I spoke to the Syrians as well, and I said, wouldn't you rather be in an area where there's a larger Muslim community? They said, the way that we've been treated here in Hereford, we'd love to stay here. Okay, so here we're demonstrating faith-inspired action and how people are feeling welcome. And I spoke to the local Hereford community as well, who, if you know anything about rural areas, infrastructure is not as developed, bus services and all the rest of it. They said, no, we want to do our part in be remembered in history, that we've done our part as well to ensure that we, in a time of crisis, had enough heart to share. I think those are honestly the sentiments, and this isn't just left-leaning liberal people who want to do good and are do-goody people and want to help people from all different walks. And this was the consistent theme, Iqbal, over that 2 years that we did this commission. The report is available. It's Commission for the Integration of Refugees. We handed that over to the incoming Labour administration, and we were hoping for some of that to be implemented, but it's in such a political framing at this moment in time. It's very difficult to have rational conversations which enable us to have a good positive outcome as to what is a good asylum refugee system, which I think is all evidenced by what we've been sort of doing recently.
But rhetoric aside, if you were in a room with, the likes of Nigel Farage and Zia Yusuf and discussing, again, the rhetoric aside and, the sort of dialing up the animosity, leaving all that aside, in terms of the actual substantive policy that is being put forward right now, what we know of it right now, what would you be saying to them is good about it and not so good about it?
I would say that what's good about it is that the LSE economic modelling has demonstrated this socioeconomic benefit.
No, I'm not saying what's good about the immigration.
Yeah.
The actual their proposals around migration.
Mass deportation. I said it goes against everything that we stand for. For me, that feels very un-British. That feels what's happening like across the pond in the United States. And ask the people of liberal democracies, humanitarian frameworks, international law, of all the rules of the international order that we've sort of worked hard to get to, are being dismantled one by one. So let's just look across the pond and see what that kind of looks like. It's quite horrific. This is not the kind of way that you deal with challenges within, even if you're, I've got real beef and real gripes with the immigration system and how people are abusing it, as it were. Okay, let's look at the loopholes, look at the weaknesses, look at the system and try to address it in a calm, rational way and taking the political heat out of it. And so I would say that I'd be more than willing to sit down, have a conversation on a policy practical level, taking into consideration Europe, taking into consideration migration patterns in the first place, taking into consideration sort of our contribution to instability in the world, taking into consideration the movement of people, and also taking into consideration, I worked for a Syrian crisis, I was working in Turkey. Millions and millions were housed locally, Lebanon, Turkey. So the vast majority of refugees, asylum seekers, refugees, live local. Okay, and the brunt has been borne by those in that particular. Very small numbers come to United Kingdom, and those numbers have been exaggerated to fulfill a particular narrative. And so I question the whole premise of the debate in the first place, is the honest. But if we can get to a space where we can have a rational conversation where there's no cameras and it's evidence-based, economic modelling, the benefits, socioeconomic, historical context and all the rest of it, then we're in a good place. But if the conversation is about brown people versus white people, then we should have that kind of conversation and not masquerade it into something else. And I think that's what's happening.
Some of the people obviously putting these kinds of policies forward are very much brown. So it's it's a little bit. This is an interesting. I mean, I don't know whether I'm not sure I fully kind of understood the psychology of this kind of thing, where it's often the case that the children or grandchildren of immigrants become quickly anti-immigration. Do you have any psychological assessments that you'd like to offer?
We can unpack some of that after the podcast. Not ones that I'm going to go on here for at this moment in time.
Fair enough.
I think the fundamental point here is that, look, people are good. Natural fitra is good. People in Hereford, people in Wales, Cardiff, the valleys, outside, people are good. The socioeconomic circumstances in which people are finding themselves right now is very tough. Some argue that Britain is broken. Certainly the institutions that I can see are creaking. Certainly the civil society space that I work in, or that we work in, amongst all, whether it's at homeless level, youth sector, refugee sector, all of it is quite stretched. And the challenge is that will we continue to work in a fragmented manner, almost in siloed fashion, which probably may have something to do with the fact that the civil society sector has been left unattended for at least a decade and a half. Not to get too much into political framework, but community infrastructure building was a big thing in the previous administration, and it was downgraded in the current or the previous under the Conservative government. And we're hoping that in this administration, the value and the social and economic value, but mostly importantly, the social value of community infrastructure is reinvested in, where we can then build back communities in helping each other who are going through difficult times. And one of the challenges is that as Muslim communities, we live largely in isolated areas. I grew up in Birmingham. You can put the heat map as to where the Muslim community is and although social mobility is definitely changing the sort of social economic interactions of that, but the vast majority still live in deep inner city areas, which are increasingly isolated from wider society. And one of the things that we need to sort of reflect on is that the social interaction that we benefited from maybe in the 60s and the 70s is less so now, and we may potentially inadvertently, as a consequence of all of this, have left less to do with people who don't look like us or sound like us or have the same belief system as us, and that might make us inadvertently more isolated or less connected, as it were. And that's something that I'm hoping that as social mobility, as our intentional part of this civil society building happens, that we get better connected to people who are not just who are not a mirror image of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move beyond just the sort of asylum seeker, immigration discussion and component for a second. Like you rightly identified before, even leaving that aside, there is an increasing anti-Islam, anti-Muslim narrative, and obviously the vast majority of them are obviously British citizens. So it's not a question of there's an intersection between sort of Muslim and immigrant or Muslim and asylum seeker. But leaving that aside, obviously the vast majority are citizens. So what do you make of the narrative? How do you characterize the narrative as it is right now in that regard? And what do you feel? How well or how badly has the response been?
The anti-Muslim rhetoric seems to be dialing up. Whether you take grooming or again, as illustrated, living separate lives and not integrate the apparent accusation of not being integrated and all the rest of it. It seems to be in a space in which that this othering of Muslim identity is something that is being used by populist movements such as Reform. You hear it in their speech, and then you've also heard that from the likes of Tommy Robinson and the EDL types, as it were, that seems to be sort of mobilizing. It was quite it was very disturbing to see it on display in that way, because on that weekend there was no mention of refugee migrants and all the rest of it. It was very much against Islam and Muslims. People were flown in and all the rest of it. And Musk talked about the fight back. So I think there is a definite dial-up, as we spoke about earlier, of this narrative, which has not just happened now, but has happened over a period of time, targeting the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, targeting the capital, and an underbelly of pure racism, discrimination, and a othering of minoritized communities, of which Islam and Muslims has been on the receiving end of. So I think that is going to be a central pillar strategy moving forward of the populist movements, to say that the Muslim community, or Islam stroke Muslim, will be used interchangeably, is at odds with the liberal British value system. And then you'll pick on Sharia courts, or all of these other easy. You'll start on the burqa, you'll do Sharia courts. All of the easy things that you can that are visible to demonstrate the strength of the argument. So I think that is going to be that is going to continue to be a central pillar. How we as Muslim community sort of engage with that, respond to that, think about what that world would look like if it sort of dials up to a level where it becomes, Baroness Varsi spoke about Islamophobia passing the dinner table test. I mean, this is breakfast, lunch, dinner, all in one, right? This is now carte blanche, let's go for it. And the fear is that the sort of opposition, government, administration, and the rest of it is fairly weak on responding to this kind of hate, because it needs bold, courageous leadership to defend the fundamental human rights, the fundamental liberties and civil rights of all communities in Britain. And I just feel that's at risk here. So from a Muslim community point of view, I don't think we've got our head around the fact that this is coming, and it's coming thick and fast. And possibly we're probably still too, I would say, dealing with our sort of growing pains as institutions anchoring in society and anchoring in the cities and towns that we live in, and haven't woken up to the threat that is coming in. Maybe it's to do with the fact that it's where I feel it's particularly acute because of the sector I'm kind of currently working in. But like I said, I'm of the view that it's refugee, migrant, minorities, climate change, Muslim, this, that, and the other. So it'll all be a sequence of things. And I really don't think that, from the conversations I've been in, and I might not have been in too many, but it doesn't seem that we're quite ready for what's coming ahead.
Okay, so we'll talk about the kind of, let's call it the engagement level response and how that might need to change.
Okay.
But again, I want to ask a similar question that I asked sort of before, which was to say, what aspects of the critique that's leveled at the community, to what extent are some of those fair? To what extent is there a degree of ghettoization, perhaps different types of racism, othering, etc., that actually does take a hold of some people within the community, or maybe large parts of the community? Like, is there anything about the internal mindset that is actually problematic and does, if not directly, maybe indirectly contribute to the various divisions that we see?
It's a good question, and it's something to reflect on. But our parents' generation came in, they built the basics, the infrastructure, food, halal food, mosques, madrasas, the basic core infrastructure that minoritized communities like ours, Muslim communities, settle in anywhere in the world. And I've been very fortunate to live in the States and live here in the United Kingdom. and in UK. And so the basic infrastructure, I think, considering their level of wealth, education, cultural understanding, I think they've done a phenomenal job in building the core infrastructure across the United Kingdom. The next stage of its evolution, I think it's struggling because it seemed to be. I don't know how good your Punjabi is, but my late mother used to say to me when I was kind of stuck in between both worlds, between the Asian culture world and the sort of wider English culture. So she said to be careful that you don't get into a situation na utte joge na itte joge, right? Which is not good enough for there and not good enough for here. Which was referring to Pakistan because I had no real cultural context of how to survive in Pakistan, and I was also navigating what young person living in the West look like as well. So what we're in a situation is that the core infrastructure has been built across the country, whichever area you go. But I think it's grappling with the evolution. What I was fortunate enough to lead on a report called the British Muslim Civil Society Report. And I think that British Muslim part we're still struggling with or we're still grappling with. And these institutions, that what I would call them as community anchor institutions, which are really a place of respite or sanctuary or physical infrastructure that exists, they're grappling with the evolution of what modernity looks like or modernity feels like in 2025 and beyond. We've got this big political context played out. We've got move to the right. We've, in other words, 20 years ago, having your photos with the local politicians and the local vicar and imam and everything was okay. 2025, that's not going to cut it. 50% of our population under the age of 25, they're not in any of those photos. They don't want to be in those photos. They see it as uncool in being those photos. They want to be practically social action led. They want to be a part of something, a social justice, social action, climate change, cleaning up the streets, doing this. They are ills and social ills of society. But if we I remember my own sort of early days when the Bosnia crisis happened in the Balkans. Dr. Hani al-Banna, the Islamic Leaf, most of the volunteer workforce were young people. He channeled our anger and frustration and real deep-seated anger of what was happening in Bosnia at that particular time and channeled it towards supporting our brothers and sisters in Bosnia at that particular time. So we had a channel in which that we could express our emotions through a way that was meaningful at that particular time. We've got 50% of the population is under the age of 25, disengaged, as Dr. Wajid in MCB called it in the one of the BBC Radio 4 programs. We've lost the dressing room. That is just fact. You go to any of these areas, young people, they're not engaged.
So we meaning?
We, the Muslim community. Mm-hmm. We, the Muslim civil society infrastructure. Last year, the riots happened in August. There was talk about there was a far right demonstration, march through Solihull, across the hotels. Within half an hour, 500 youth turned up at our masjid from neighbouring Birmingham. At that point, I was trying to say to them, listen, it's all in hand, it's all in control. And I realised that they weren't listening to the likes of me. And I would say that I'm not in the older uncle generation stage, although it's disputable.
Give it a couple of years. Yeah.
Give it a couple of years, I'm already in that space. But young people are saying, listen, we're here to defend the mosque. We're here to support it. And we're not going to go away until we feel that the threat against the masjid, whether you're in charge or whether you're on the committee of the masjid or not, that's irrelevant. We've come here in an act of solidarity, in an act of protection. Okay, because we don't believe the state structures, the police, you, uncle on the committee will have any ability to ward off what's coming. So they stayed there till 11 o'clock at night. We tried to have rational conversations, all the rest of it, it wasn't happening. Okay, so you kind of made me realize and think, and I went on Channel 4 saying that I think we have a problem. We have a disconnect between how the young people feel and the structures that we've got in place. You have to sort of recognize that, well, they're not involved, they're not been integrated into our system. We don't have an intergenerational approaches towards our building, our institutions, our programs, our activities. They're not part of that policy making. So naturally, they've been left outside. And that's exactly how I would feel, Iqbal, if it was done to me in a way that sort of I was growing up in modern in current day. So I would say that the Muslim civil society landscape, masajids, organizations by and large, have a phenomenal untapped potential. 50% of our population under 25, mashallah, active, would love to do stuff, would be physically engaged and all the rest of it. But we failed in providing pipelines in which that we could put these good young people to use. Or they could be, not just to use, that doesn't sound right. They have agencies. Or bring them into the fold to say, what are the ideas in which that we could help clean up Birmingham. I keep focusing on Birmingham. That's kind of homeland, is it? Clean up Birmingham, be involved in Birmingham, be in social change in Birmingham, be a part of a greater allyship. What else is going on in sort of Birmingham and the likes, and they could be a part of it. Instead, at times, either we're very angry, and so there's a counter-protest. We're politically active, which means I'm going to target politician X, Y, and Z. Or we just kind of use them for the most menial of tasks. And they've got a lot more to offer. A lot of young people, actually one of the guys that you put forward to him, they've got some brilliant ideas. They're really smart people, intelligent, insightful, driven. Give them space. Let them come in. Let them have the conversation about what social change looks like from a young person's point of view. Whilst I mentioned that, I mean, we've got a report coming out called the Muslim Youth Future. So we did that with Goldsmith University. That sort of had conversations with 160 young people across the country about how they feel about the civil society, how they feel about their place, their sense of belonging within the community and within wider society, and how they want to bring social change. So I think there is a failing within what you might say current level of Muslim civil society leadership in not recognizing the potential talent that's in our midst.
You seem to touch on it slightly, but I thought you would emphasize also, or simultaneously, and maybe give you the opportunity to do so, the major problem, I think maybe the bigger problem of insularity, meaning that actually, all of these, part of the issue is that it's almost for certain that if there is a so-called Muslim organization, Muslim institution, that it has been set up in order to serve Muslims or Muslim interests, either by way of advocacy and representation, or by way of direct services, or even now products, because even in the kind of commercial space, oftentimes something that is branded as Muslim, Islamic, halal, etc., is typically then targeted to typically targeted towards a sort of Muslim-only kind of audience, implicitly or explicitly. And so you have a real issue here in terms of the identity, because what seems to naturally flow from this kind of Muslim identity is a massive privileging for the Muslim concern, the Muslim, which then you can. I'm not saying that's responsible for then everything you see and hear from quote unquote the other side, but it really helps that case, and there's a principal problem with it anyway, even before you get to that.
Yeah. Look, there's no denying that, Iqbal, and it's a historical social construct. Historical social construct of our insularity is a historical social construct, in the sense that, again, parents' generation came 60s, 70s, built that thing, and it is a socioeconomic consequence and a framing that condition. I'd like to think contributes to the conditioning of insularity. Okay? I was, again, coming back to my personal lived experience, last year I was very fortunate to play the role of, I forgot the name for it now. How can I forget it when I did it for a whole year? My wife was the mayor of Solihull. In her acceptance speech, she talked about serving all of Solihull as the mayor of Solihull. The vast majority are they're not. It's not a Muslim majority space, as it were, and we spoke about that. And I was very, very fortunate to attend, participate, engage in over 600. Well, she did 650 engagements, and that vast majority, 99% of that, was not Muslim. Okay, it was rural England, Warwickshire, all of that part of sort of, and their view of sort of Birmingham was somewhat tainted by what they had read and internalized. So I think when you sort of experience a different setting, motivated by your principles, your conviction of your ideals and your faith, but you've got service at the core of your sort of mentality. And when presented an opportunity, as we were last year, we were very honored, blessed, privileged, huge. It was probably one of the biggest honors of our life, working life, as it were, to serve in a borough in this way as the first Muslim woman, mayor of Solihull. And I was observing it as not at the front, but more behind, which is a little bit different for me, as it were. In Urdu, they call it, I was Marda Awal. I was Marda Awal for a whole year.
If you know, you know. Yeah.
If you know, you know. It's a Pakistani term, Urdu term. Anyway, and I was observing the interaction. So there we had presented an opportunity of serving much wider than ourselves and then insular. I think individuals play a great role in enabling that to happen. The vast majority of us don't live in those kind of circumstances, but where the opportunity presents itself, inshallah, you can see great service. So we are, I would agree, largely insular, serving what you might call our own constituency, our own communities, and our own Islamic Muslim framing, which for me goes against our kind of core ideals, because we're here, I think I mentioned it previously, but one of the hadith or sayings that I was very drawn to back in the early days of activism is the best of you are the most beneficial to the best of you are those who are most beneficial to others. The others doesn't have a categorization. The others doesn't say they have to be Muslim or they have to have a certain creed, this and the other. It's just others who we serve. And so when the vast majority of us live in inner city, largely Muslim populated areas, then that, I think, contributes to driving an insularity that I think is problematic framing, because it isolates ourselves from fulfilling our khidmah, our service to humanity.
But can you see that there's something of a tension between then what you've just said and what you were saying earlier, which was that actually, this is a non-white area, but it's integrated. It's not that but that doesn't mean it's not integrated.
I can see there's a tension.
As meaning,
that doesn't make it not integrated. That was the point I was trying to make.
Sure, you said that then, but obviously just now, when you're talking about when you do have like high concentrations of, say, Muslims in certain areas, it doesn't mean it's not integrated in one meaning of, or one sense of integration. But from the lens that we're discussing now,
that's right.
You've basically said kind of the opposite thing, which is actually it does support a kind of.
I said it creates an insularity.
Yeah. So I mean,
I think the integrated term is very loaded, used by politicians.
I understand.
So I have a slight problem with that frame.
Sure.
I have a big problem with that frame. Because
I understand.
It's designed to mean something
yeah.
else. But I do say that it does create insularity.
Yeah, but these two things are related.
Yeah. I remember, again, mid-90s, medical doctors, Los Angeles, UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, fantastic university, and MSA. So the guys at the MSA at UCLA, who were training to be doctors, set up something called the Ummah Free Clinic in downtown in South Central LA. South Central LA is poor, it's Afro-Caribbean, Latino, there's no healthcare. It is the ghetto. Okay? I'm sure it's not your world, but all those rap movies and everything are, filmed in those spaces, right? It was that kind of world. And these undergrads, sorry, it's been about 30 years, so forgive me, the name slips me at the moment, but maybe it'll come back to me. The folks said they helped create what's called the Ummah Free Clinic in South Central Los Angeles. Alhamdulillah, to this day it's running. It's service run by Muslim doctors, medical professionals, all the rest of it, is to serve those that don't have health care in Los Angeles. For me, it really dawned upon me what the medical profession, the doctors, fulfilling a need. It wasn't as much needed in the Muslim community because their needs have been fulfilled. So that's how they were fulfilling that service. And I think those kind of initiatives in a different kind of cultural setting demonstrates service to a wider society, which I think inadvertently fulfills our religious, theological, Islamic mandate, framework, service, and fulfills that sort of thing. But I keep coming back to the United Kingdom and say it's a very different ball game, and it's a very different because it's poorer, it's socioeconomically, we live in these kind of ghettoized insular environments, and then our sort of internalizing that, then by default it just serves the local community. And who's in the local community? Everybody, which are largely Muslim or minority led.
But oftentimes, even if it's not to do with the actual local community, meaning geographically speaking, even if it's just to sort of in the technological sort of ether, right? Even then, it's I'm just wondering. Are there any examples of organizations, projects from within the community that are functioning similarly to the one that you mentioned in the US that you like?
It's great point. So this evolution battle, I don't call it battle, but this strain, generation 1 set up the core infrastructure, generation 2 a bit more outward looking. I'm hesitant to use the word progressive because I don't want that to be taken in a different meaning, but more outward looking, locally engineered, part of civil society infrastructure, statutory body commissioning, and all the rest of it. So all of that. I think that's what's happening across the country with people now sort of where the baton and reins have been handed over to next generational leaders, as it was, civil society leaders, maybe a 40, 50 years old generation. So that I can see visibly taking place across the country. There's one organization that comes to mind. There's plenty, but there's one that I've been personally involved in and have a great amount of admiration for. It's called Himmah. It's in Nottingham. The word Himmah comes from obviously that conviction, as it were, a desire for change, for social change. And Saj, his name is the gentleman who runs it. And I was sitting in it's a community anchor organization, and I frequented it over many days. And the interesting thing was Monday night, I saw African Caribbean community. Tuesday night, Eastern European community. Wednesday night, another community. Every single night of the week, whether it's space for people to come together, young people, feeding, eating, legal advice, surgery. I saw all of Nottingham in that room, occupy in different nights. And Sad said to me that, Jank, we want to be here for all of Nottingham, not just part of Nottingham. And I think that embodies for me, by the way, Prince Harry, when he visited Nottingham just recently, they gave him a donation and contributed towards the programs of Himmah, and he was there, and they were all there commending on it. So it's under the banner of One Nottingham. Himmah is Muslim faith inspired. Saj is a Muslim civil society social justice activist leader, comes from that framing, but he's part of something bigger, and that part of something bigger is beautiful to watch. And in actual terms, when I see it manifested in a way that I see all of Nottingham come into that society, into that space, feeling safe, feeling welcome, feeling that they've got a place, a home to come to. I think it makes sense. And the building that he occupies was a Methodist church that's been abandoned, and so he's taken that on and given it a new lease of life. But it becomes a community anchored organization that is welcoming to all. So whether you're a mosque or a community center or a hub or whatever, there are places like that across the Midlands, in Birmingham, in Nottingham, and across. And I think this evolution is so that fills me with some hope that I might say this, but the change of leadership is bringing a social change in the fabric of our the way that we're operating in. But of course, there's a long way to go, and I'm not going to paint a rosy picture and look at it through the image of just one organization. There's over 1,000, 2,000 organizations and infrastructure across the country. There's a lot to go. But where I have seen that there's a change in leadership, I've seen a change in material impact on the way that they are functioning.
What about now? A lot of what we've spoken about is at the local level, grassroots level type projects. What about at the national level now? I mean, what is the?
Fills me with despair.
Okay, so let's talk me through your despair.
A lot of these conversations.
I mean, you mentioned MCB, and I think it would be good
at the national level. I spent a lot of my time at the national level. I was UK Director of Islamic Leaf, was made, all this. So there was a lot of national conversations about we all come together, just a little bit like in the room that I just sat in. Did all the national organizations, 50 leaders, about how we're going to respond. Change actually happens at the ground level.
Yeah, but I'm interested in us speaking of at the national level, but maybe in a way this away from, let's say, the international relief kind of lead, because obviously within the community these are the big organizations, that's fine, but I think like you told me, we had a brief conversation before this, and you mentioned to me, well, okay, that's fine, but actually fundamentally their concern is elsewhere essentially.
It's not international development organization,
right? Exactly.
Although I think there is an effort to
do more in
the UK.
Fine, okay.
So from a national institution point of view, like again, the national infrastructure is very much underinvested. It is inadequate.
But what about the orientation? Because the thing is now, it's like, you've been speaking about faith-based, local grassroots activism, social organizations, change, but for a universal benefit. Now, the fundamental issue with something like, again, with say, whether it's like an MCB or it's a MEND or it's a kind of a project like the Muslim Vote or whatever, at the end of the day, these things at the national level seem to break that principle, because at the end of the day, at the national level, they're still representing Muslim concern. Now, is there still a space for that, do you think? Or actually, do you think, in a way, that too needs to be transcended? Because ultimately, what we need to be doing is getting the voice in there for issues, for principles, for values, not for a specific people.
Yeah, I agree. The principal nature of it, that we should be issue-based, advocating for a better society, okay? And advocating for a better society, a more integrated, a more engaged, more cohesive society. Okay, and the way that cohesive, we ensure that we are championing the causes of those that are marginalized and those that are most vulnerable in society. If at the national level, our orientation, our outlook is just to serve, again, our mandate and constituency is just to serve ourselves, I think this is a flaw in the system. There is a flaw in the outlook. I spoke a lot about local, because I think, having been in the national conversation for quite some time and being quite disenfranchised with sitting in lots of rooms and conversations and photos and, paying speech after speech, change happens locally. Iqbal, you and I were involved at the Grenfell response. Okay, I felt it was a real game changer for me personally, and a real demonstration of where social change happens. 72 people tragically lost their lives. The state failed in its duty of protection. Civil society, we all came together. Al-Manar, National Zakat Foundation, I was heading up Muslim Aid at the time, Methodist, Port Bellow Trust, and we all came together to say, how can we help and assist and make a change at this level? That's where change happens, at the localized level. At the national level, if there's a disconnect in the heads and minds of if there's too much of a disconnect between that level and this level, then these folks, or this conversation, folks depersonalizing it, this conversation feels like an ivory tower conversation. Okay? And the way that it connects to reality is ensuring that the framework in which that it operates or mandated from is connected to the local. That's one. Secondly, I think the national infrastructure organizations are extremely weak, and extremely, underinvested, because again, if I showed you the work that Himmah does, you'd say, yeah, that's great. I like to invest in that. And so people can connect to that. So then they'll give money and they'll support it, and all of these local organizations, because it has a local constituency. The national organizations don't have an automatic constituency, so it's harder to conceptualize the benefit that they bring to Muslims, let alone wider society. So that's why it's harder to sort of resource, and then when it's poorly resourced, it's poorly it's inadequate in fulfilling its role. And the likes of MCB are poorly resourced and set themselves up as an umbrella organization, but underneath they'll say themselves that the organization infrastructure just does not exist. So we'll continue to struggle with this, unfortunately, because there is a space for national organizations, and I think if they're better resourced, they'll be better outward-facing, external-looking. But at the moment, it is fairly hand-to-mouth. It is fairly inadequately resourced, and it's largely volunteer-led at this moment, so it's problematic. And so that's just kind of the resourcing question, which I think contributes to the lack of expansive thinking that's needed at this level. Because fundamentally, wherever we walk to a room or wherever we're in a space, if we hear us only talking about the needs of the Muslims, I think that's going to disconnect us from the wider audience that we're trying to engage with at this moment, because it looks very parochial. There is a space for that constituency, but we want to help that community and constituency improve itself so that it can better serve in a wider sense, as it were. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a journey that's organically taking place, but at a very, unfortunately, not at the pace that it needs to happen given the political context that we're operating in.
For many people who might be watching or listening to this, they might not necessarily have a direct hand in any particular national institution. Maybe from a local institution perspective, it's just, okay, I'm attending my local mosque now and again. There are various maybe professional networks that I'm involved in. What do they do? Practically, what's your message to these kinds of people who aren't necessarily, either they're not activists, they're not civil society, they're just, well, probably the majority of the community. What's your message?
I might get a bit philosophical about this, but I think deep inside, I think the Prophet ﷺ came from a love for humanity and love for all. Okay, not love for a particular just creed that mirrored one another, and I think that has to come from deep inside. Again, I reflect on my own sort of personal journey. I really didn't know any Bosnians, but we wanted to make a material difference in a way that wasn't just there feeling bad about ourselves. Here, if we look around ourselves and the situation is not good, then I'd encourage us to reach out and find a way that we can help bring a social change. I think we did it during COVID. Mosques were shut. Couldn't go for worship, couldn't go for prayer. What happened then? We said, okay, what does our locality need? It needs, the elderly need food, the healthcare workers need this, that, and the other. We just switched into khidmah and service of what the local needs were. We found it very organically. It wasn't orchestrated by a blueprint and strategy conversations held nationally, what we were. There was some coordination about amplifying all of that. But, the medical professionals, BEMA, this, that, and the other, everybody got on with it in serving sort of. So I would say that we take that mentality that we had, in which we were forced to close our doors to our constituents and start thinking other way, but make that a default and not just a response to a crisis. Make that the default way of operating. So young people, whether it's elderly, food bank, whatever that it is that you feel is your thing, that you can contribute, you walk out your door into any civil society structure, organization, whatever it is, you'll find something to do. I think that the role of community-based organizations are enabling those pathways to take place so that it's easier for people to find out where they can support young people, or they can support mentoring, where they can help in loneliness loneliness for elderly people who are very, very lonely at this moment in time. And that's a social in our society. So there are numerous ways, but I'm very much hoping that, again, Muslim civil society organizations at the localized level, which I have a bit more confidence in and faith in, because they're a bit more better resourced and they're a bit more connected on the ground in which social change happens, can enable, I don't say signposting, but pathways to khair, to social good, to help us to bring positive, to bring a little bit of positive light into people who are really struggling at this moment. If we stepped outside our own framework and spoke to people are really struggling. And if they found good people, Muslim or otherwise, to be there for them, they'll remember that for a very, very long time. If you want to counter Islamophobia, let's put ourselves to good use, and then you'll see how we'll change the narrative, because what they hear won't be their experience, because they've come into contact with somebody who's been there for them. And if that somebody's motivated by their faith as a driver, which is fine, which is good, then that social action and social interaction can be a positive one for the person who wants to do something, and the person who is on the receiving end of that as well.
A few times in this conversation, you've reminded me about there's a very, very powerful passage in the Quran. In translation, respond with that which is better.
Absolutely.
So that between you and the person with whom there's currently enmity, it could be that you become close friends.
Absolutely.
But then it says, no one achieves this except for people of patience and persistence. And no one achieves this except for, and then it's a very unusual phrase actually, the only time this phrase comes in the whole of the Revelation, dhu hadhin azim, meaning it's kind of mysterious. It kind of translates to the one who possesses a great resource, or a great almost treasure, but it's almost like an undefined capacity, that somebody's got like a very deep, I think the probably posh word for it would be like a deep interiority kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like you're able to dig very deep within,
yes,
to essentially see beyond this immediate kind of enmity, essentially, and to understand that there's a way to transcend the divide by responding in goodness. And then finally, the third verse there says, but if you get a temptation from the devil, then seek refuge in God, because obviously it's very difficult, right?
Yeah.
You'll always be prompted to respond in a way that's so seek refuge with God, and He's the hearing, the knowing.
I don't know if it's a beautiful reminder. I don't know if you cast your mind back, if you were fortunate or blessed enough to be able to serve somebody during COVID time.
Mm-hmm.
When our mosque was sort of handing out food items to the elderly, and we were driving out, and it was organized, and you were driving out at that time, and you realized people couldn't leave their homes, especially the elderly, they couldn't do their shopping, and you went out there and you did that for them. You knocked on the door and you opened it, and they, hey, saw a brown face, which they might not have seen it. I think small acts of kindness, small genuine acts, not for any other motivation other than the fact that you're trying to relieve someone's need, and inshallah, if Allah accepts, then you get benefit from that. But the interaction between that individual and yourself is very, I mean, it's just full of barakah, blessings. It's so beautiful that I think it'll stay with you for a lifetime, both on the receiving end and both on the giving end. I remember as a humanitarian aid worker, I used to travel all around the world and all the rest of it. And I used to always walk away thinking, who's benefited more, the giver or the receiver? Because the giver, it always dawned upon me, no matter how challenging one's life is, it's nowhere near, it doesn't even come close to the one who have just given this aid assistance to. And their response is so humbling that it makes you feel so small and so insignificant. So that sort of real practical daily interaction will really, I think, have a powerful impact on us on a daily basis. And the more disconnected we are and we stay in abstract theory world about, you know, social change and theory of change, and I often have been in many conversations, I do strategy and we do all these for civil society organizations. But the real beautiful part is when we get on the ground, when we see the social change take place. And I think that's where the magic happens. And if we keep the magic going in both spaces, then inshallah we can have a positive outlook for a better view of a better view of the world and a better view of our society and a better view of making Britain great again.
Well, okay, I think we'll conclude on that note. And thank you so much. It's been, I think, a useful and enriching conversation. I am a big supporter of your narrative. We've butted heads before, but I think somehow in our own way.
Who hasn't butted heads with you? I don't know anybody who doesn't, but I think fair. You do it. I think you do it intentionally to get a kick out of it. Deep inside, I think you get some kind of pleasure about butting heads.
I really don't, to be honest. It's just when it's just an unfortunate reality that when I think deeply about most issues and I wonder about, okay, what's the right way forward here, and then I kind of look at where maybe the status quo is, there just almost always is a gap. So whether it's the topic of zakah, giving, or salah, or leadership, or representation, or identity, or whatever. So I don't know, but no. Anyway, it's not about me. It's about you. I'm glad that it's
about us.
Indeed. There you go. So I'm glad we've had the conversation, and I'm a supporter of your narrative and work, and I hope that it continues to flourish. And that your voice gets, further amplified. And I know after you're a veteran, obviously, of the space. You've been serving in so many different ways for, God knows how long. But there's still a lot to do. So I hope that you have a long and healthy life in which you can continue to serve and be of benefit.
Thank you very much, Iqbal. I really appreciate it. And I thank you for facilitating these conversations in which I was able to sort of unpack some challenging discourse around all of these topical, all of these challenging topical conversations. And so you're providing a space for that. That's really, really very, very, very beneficial. And we can just continue to strive and inshallah do our level best, and hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts and forgives us for our shortcomings and enables us to be instruments of khair.
Amen to that. All right. Thank you. Until next time.
Thank you very much.